So we've been going through this series, not just another brick in the wall, and today is the last weekend of that series. This is the culmination of what we've been doing for the last 7 weeks, and we've been looking a lot at the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders challenging Jesus with a bunch of silly questions, a bunch of just traps that they were trying to catch him in, and we've been talking about how they, as religious leaders, were bricks in the wall. They're all about the rules and the laws, and so today we get Jesus' final statement, pretty much, to these religious leaders, and it's not one of kindness and gentleness. People picture Jesus as just so nice, and his hair is flowing, and all that stuff, right? Not so much here. Today, Jesus is a little harsh. This chapter is called the Woe to the Pharisees, and he just goes off on the Pharisees in this chapter, and so we're going to have some fun with it. We're going through a whole chapter today, so we're not actually going to stand for the teachings and commands like we normally do, because I don't want you to stand for the entire service. So, so we're going to do this. We're going to jump in here. We're going to hit this idea of a brick buster. All right, a brick buster. And so think of Jesus today as a brick buster, and that comes from this verse here, a couple chapters earlier from where we're starting today. Matthew 21, verse 42. It says, "Then Jesus asked them, 'Didn't you ever read this in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has now become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful to see. I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation that will produce the proper fruit. Anyone who stumbles over that stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone it falls on.'" All right, brick buster. You fall on Jesus, he's the cornerstone. You fall on him and you shatter, right? He's solid. He's stationary, and anyone who falls on him shatters. And not only that, but anyone the stone falls on is crushed. Jesus is a brick buster, and so that's what we're thinking about today. That's the mentality we're having, and the question we're going after. What does it mean to be on the brick busters, Jesus' team? What does it mean to be on the brick busters, Jesus' team? About 2 weeks ago, I was up here. I spoke on the resurrection. You may remember the Sadducees came to Jesus and asked him a silly question about marriage, attempting to embarrass him and make him look foolish, but Jesus has always shut them down. And last week, Trent talked about the Pharisees and them asking, what is the greatest commandment? And him responding with, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, right? And so what we're seeing in this scene that we're about to read is that the Pharisees and the Sadducees are pretty upset. They've been shut down so many times that they decide to get the whole team together. All right, so all the Pharisees, all the religious leaders, they come out to Jesus. And not only that, but a huge crowd forms around Jesus. It's about to go down. It's like a schoolyard fight. They're like, meet me outside at 1 p.m. Let's throw down, right? And so the whole town is there, and they're about to throw down publicly. And Jesus, before he throws down, he speaks to the crowd. And that's where we pick up today. Matthew 23, starting in verse 1. It says, "Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, 'The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees are the official interpreters of the law of Moses. So practice and obey whatever they tell you, but don't follow their example, for they don't practice what they teach. They crush people with unbearable religious demands, and they never lift a finger to ease the burden. Everything they do is for show. On their arms, they wear extra wide prayer boxes with scripture verses inside, and they wear robes with extra long tassels. And they love to sit at the head table at banquets and in the seats of honor in the synagogues. They love to receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi. Don't let anyone call you rabbi, for you have only one teacher, and all of you are equal as brothers and sisters. And don't address anyone on earth as father, for only God in heaven is your Father. And don't let anyone call you teacher, for you have only one teacher, the Messiah. The greatest among you must be a servant, but those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted.'" So we're going after two different definitions of brick buster today, all right? So this first half, we're going to go with one version of brick buster, and I'll let you know when we get to the second version. But what we're going to do is we're going to break down this verse into a little bit more digestible parts. So let's start, if you're taking notes. In verse 3, Jesus stresses the importance of obeying authority, even when that authority is being hypocritical. I want to share something to you from Romans chapter 13. Starting in verse 1, it says, "Everyone must submit to the governing authorities, for all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without fear of the authorities? Do what is right, and they will honor you. So I want to give you a little context of what this epistle or letter is talking about here. Paul writes this letter to a small group of believers in Rome, approximately 55, 56 AD or so. And so the leader of Rome at this time is a guy named Nero. All right, he comes into power at about 54 AD, and this guy, if you know anything about him, he's not a very nice guy, and he doesn't particularly like Christians. In fact, later on, he would feed Christians to lions in the Colosseum to get people hyped up for the Colosseum Games. There's a fire that breaks out in about 64 AD, and Nero blames all the Christians. He says the Christians are the one who started this fire that burned down Rome. He did not like Christian people. And so Paul is writing this letter to a group of believers in Rome. And he's saying to them, obey the authorities because God put them in place. Now, I don't care how you feel about leaders in your life. There is probably no worse leader you can think of to follow than Nero, who wants to kill Christians. And so Paul is telling these Roman believers, listen to what the government says. Even though the government hates you, even though the government wants to kill you, even though the government's lying about you, obey their commands because God has put them in authority. And that's a strange, weird teaching. It's a strange thing to understand. But we're going to break it down today as we keep going here. So the next thing that Jesus points out, if you're taking notes, he points out the hypocritical nature of the authorities, the Pharisees in this case, verses 4 to 7. I want to share another verse with you a little bit earlier in Romans chapter 3, starts in verse 9. It says, well then, should we conclude that we Jews are better than others? No, not at all. For we have already shown that all people, whether Jews or Gentiles, are under the power of sin. As the scriptures say, no one is righteous, not even one. No one is truly wise. No one is seeking after God. All have turned away. All have become useless. No one does good, not a single one. Their talk is foul like the stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with lies. Snake venom drips from their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. They rush to commit murder. Destruction and misery always follow them. They don't know where to find peace. They have no fear of God at all. Obviously, the law applies to those whom it is given, for its purpose is to keep people from having excuses and to show the entire world is guilty before God. For no one can ever be made right with God by doing what the law commands. The law simply shows us how sinful we are. All right, so here's the thought. Earlier in this book, Paul lays this argument out. All people have sinned. Jews, Gentiles, doesn't matter who you are. The great equalizer of humanity is sin. We are all sinful. We have all fallen from God's grace. None of us seek after him. None of us love him, right? This is the idea that Paul sets up before he starts explaining how a Christian should act, following authority and what ethics you should have and what things you should do. So the reason Jesus is specifying that we should obey authorities even when they're hypocritical is because all of us are hypocritical. All of us are hypocritical. All of us in one way or another preach against sin, but yet what do? We sin. There is only one person who has ever lived who wasn't a hypocrite, and his name is Jesus Christ. He's the only one. He's the only one who has not sinned, who did not say anything hypocritical. His entire life, everything he preached, he lived it. But every other authority in your life, every human authority is hypocritical in one way or another. So if you were not to obey hypocritical authorities, you couldn't obey any authorities at all. You couldn't obey anybody. And that's exactly the point that Jesus is making. And he makes that point in verses 8 to 10. Jesus teaches that there is only one authority, one final authority. It's him. He's the only one. He says, don't call anyone rabbi. Don't call anyone father. Don't call anyone teacher. Don't put anybody in a position as the ultimate leader in your life because you only have one. And that is Jesus Christ. Everything he says goes. And so whether or not I am imperfect, Trent is imperfect, any pastor anywhere is imperfect, what we say isn't about us, it's about all of us. It's about Christ and what we should be going after. And so whether I'm hypocritical, Jesus never is. And as long as I'm teaching him, that's what we're after. That is what you're after. You're not after emulating me. You're after emulating Christ. And so many people struggle with this thought. And so I want to give you an analogy. I want to tell you guys a story. When I was a young man, and still am a young man, and I still love basketball. All right, I love basketball, and it's perfect. We're in a gym. This is a perfect place to talk about it. And in fact, I wore my Jordans today. Everyone, yeah, take a look. All right, pretty nice, huh? I love basketball. When I was a kid, no matter how hot it was here in Arizona, it could be 120 degrees outside, I'd pull out our basketball hoop and I'd go and practice. I'd sit out in front of the street and I'd practice and I'd shoot. And I really, really wanted to play basketball really badly. But I was horrible at it, guys. I gotta be honest, I was pretty bad. I'm still pretty bad. It took a long time to get to average, you know? It took a long time to get to average. I was pretty bad. I was throwing up a lot of bricks. Do you guys know what that is? Basketball? Yes. All right, what it is, when you shoot the ball, it's when it only hits the rim, right? It doesn't go in, it just makes this loud boom sound, right? Like a brick. So in basketball, they call it a brick. And when I was a kid, I shot a lot of bricks. I shoot a lot of bricks now. But here's the thing, when I was younger, I got my first pair of Jordans, and let me tell you what, when I got those shoes, I was so confident. I was going out there and be like, I'm gonna hit them all. Every three I take's gonna go in. I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna dunk, right? And I was like maybe this tall. I'm not much taller now. You know, it wasn't gonna go so hot. But I believed in my Jordans. I believed in my J's. I was gonna go out there, I was gonna shoot threes. And when I was out there on the court, I believed it. Every shot I made, I'm like, that's right. I'm perfect. I'm MJ. I got this, right? Y'all can laugh with me, trust me. It was embarrassing. It's still embarrassing, right? But my Jordans made me feel so confident. But the reality was I was throwing up a lot of bricks. And so here's the first version of Jesus as a brick buster, all right? Jesus never misses, all right? He never shoots a brick. All right, Jesus is the only star player on our team, and he never misses. He's the brick buster. We're all throwing up bricks, and Jesus is only swishing. He's throwing threes every time, right? He is the brick buster. And so when we asked this question at the beginning, what does it mean to be on the brick busters team? What does it mean to be on Jesus's team? Well, something we have to accept. We did not make the team because of our goodness. We made the team because of God's grace. We didn't make the team because of our goodness. We made the team because of God's grace. And so what happens when you're on the Brickbusters team? Well, you see, before you're saved, when you're lost and you don't know Christ, all you throw up is bricks. That's all you do. And finally, Christ comes along and you get saved and you get baptized and you start living with Christ, and Christ pulls you up to the free throw line. And I tell a story real quick before I get into this. Growing up, my dad's sitting back there now. Growing up, when I was practicing, my dad would come out and play with me, right? He didn't help me get very much better. You see, because my dad didn't show me how to shoot. My dad went like this, wah, and just smacked it down, right? Every time I wasn't throwing bricks because it never got to the rim, right? It was in the street. It was down to the other neighborhood, right? That's not how Jesus acts. He comes alongside us in life. We're throwing up bricks, and he comes and he guides us. He puts us at the free throw line, and we start practicing. And all of a sudden, we make our first shot. Like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And over our lives, Jesus continues to guide us and train us and teach us and make us better. And all of a sudden, we're shooting 20% and 30% and 40%, 50%, 60%. And all of a sudden, we're making almost all of our shots. Sometimes we still throw up bricks, but he's teaching us and we're getting better. We start making shots. He's the brick buster. He guides us. But so many times, Christians, they think to themselves, and this is something that we struggle with. All of a sudden, I'm making it. I'm making it a lot. I must be pretty good. I'm Michael Jordan, right? You're the kid on that basketball court. I can dunk. I can hit every three. I can make everything. And we get so confident in ourselves that we forget who it is that's guiding our hand. We forget who it is that's allowing us to make the shots in the first place. We didn't make the team because we're talented. We're pretty bad. We made the team because Jesus is perfect and he is graceful and he guides our shots. Something to think about. Final note from this first part. What does it mean to be the brickbuster of Jesus' team? It means to be a humble servant. That's what he says in verse 11 to 12. The greatest among you must be a servant, but those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Something to think about. We are not better. I heard this quote on Facebook just the other day, read it. We are not better, we are forgiven. We are not better, we are forgiven. And that is the mentality we all have to have. We're not making shots because we're so awesome. We're making shots because God forgave us, and he's looking after us. And so many times we lose that. And we got to recognize what our position on the team is. You see, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they forgot this. They thought they were putting in the threes on their own. And everybody knows this person. I'm going to kind of think about this for a second. You can even close your eyes if you want to imagine it for a second. That person in your life who always talks about how good they are at something. It could be at work, it could be at school, it could be your spouse, who knows? It could be your kids. They always brag about how good they are at something. I'm so talented at this thing. Here, let me show you how to do it. Here, let me make you better. Think of this person. But in reality, they kind of suck. In reality, they're pretty bad. You know this person. I know you know them. I see your faces. I know you know this person. There's somebody in your life, work, school, wherever. They think they're awesome at something, but they're pretty dang bad. And yet they're out there. You got to do this. You got to do that. This is how you get better. This is how you do it. Is there anybody more annoying than that? Not in my opinion. Not in my opinion. And that's what Jesus is dealing with constantly through these chapters. People who think they're awesome at following God. In reality, they're throwing up bricks. Keep throwing up bricks. And he just gets fed up. He's done with it. He's done with the bragging. He's done with the do this, do that. And he just calls them out. And so I have this question for you. Do we desire to seek the lost, or do we desire to condemn the lost? Do we desire to seek the lost, or do we desire to condemn the lost? I have some strange encounters in my life. God puts me in situations. A lot of times I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Right? But he puts me in these situations where I meet people and we have conversations, and it always goes somewhat well. So far, at least, no one's tried to hurt me or anything, so that's good. But I wear this cross around all the time, and my parents give me a hard time. It's a big Catholic cross, whatever you want to say. But I wear it around all the time. I'm always wearing it. And so I get in weird conversations. Well, I was at the dentist. And I was just sitting down, and the lady that was prepping me, she was in, so you can picture the scene, she was in all black clothes, and she had black makeup and black lipstick and the whole look. And so we had a conversation. She just struck up a conversation. She's like, why do you wear that cross? And we started talking. And so we get further and further into the conversation. I tell her I'm a pastor and that I teach and all these things. And she just opens up to me. I don't know why, but she just opens up to me and she says, when I was a kid, I went to Catholic school. I grew up in Mexico, went to Catholic school. And she's like, I got to be honest with you, I hate the church. And I hate everybody in it. I hate the church, and I'll tell you why. When I was a kid, I watched my friends get pulled into a room. I watched them get raped. I watched them get beaten by men who said they loved God. And she's like, I hate the church. And I hate everyone in it because they're liars. And at the time, what was going on a couple months ago, maybe you remember, the Catholic Church is having a big thing that's happening again. There's about 1,000 cover-ups of sexual abuse in the church, right? And this is a big ordeal, and it was happening at this very time. And so here I find myself at the dentist, a pastor with a big cross on his chest, sitting in a chair with a lady who had immense traumatic experience. I can't tell her that it stopped happening. Oh, that's in the past. It was literally happening right in that moment. And so I'm praying to God, what in the world am I supposed to say? What in the world am I supposed to do? And God guided me through this conversation, and we walked through it. But I just remember going home that day, and I went home to my apartment. I was by myself, and I got down on my hands and knees, and I prayed to God, and I begged God. I said, God, bring your justice. Bring your justice. I am just tired. I'm tired of the evil. I'm tired of the people who claim your name and lie about it. I'm tired of the people who are hurting people. I'm tired of it, God. Bring your justice. Come back now. I remember just praying it fervently. I was crying, and I was praying this. And I have to tell you guys something. I was wrong to pray this prayer. It was wrong. Woe to me. Because in that moment, I was a Pharisee. Woe to me. And I'll tell you why. There's a story that Brian, the intern, and I have been going through Genesis together. And in Genesis chapter 18, there's a story of a guy named Abraham. Maybe you're familiar. And he's having a conversation with God, and there's this city, it's called Sodom. And in this city, it's pretty messed up. They had a ring of homosexual gang rape people who were just going to people's houses, right? And the whole town was in on it. And so this city is messed up, and Abraham's having a conversation with God, and God's telling him, I'm about to burn this city to the ground. And Abraham says, God, if there's only 50 people who are righteous, save the whole town. Save the whole city. And God says, okay. And then Abraham debates him. He says, if there's only 40 people in the town, and God says, okay. There's only 30, okay. 20, okay. 10, okay. And Abraham is debating God, and he's saying, God, show your grace. If there's only 10 people in there, save this evil, horrible town from destruction. This is why I was wrong. I was praying for God's justice. I was praying for God to pour down. But there are so many lost people in this world that if God truly came back today, would be lost into eternity. And we have an opportunity, no matter how evil the world is, no matter how awful the world is, we have an opportunity every day to go after those people. We should be praying to God, please stay away. If there's just one person left who could be saved, stay away. Give us more time. Give us more of a chance. We should be praying for grace, not for justice. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they were praying for justice, and Jesus was done with it. And he said, all right, I'm going to give you what you want. And so if you're listening in here and you've had this prayer before, maybe recently, all these horrible tragedies that happen in our world, you've said this prayer before, be careful. Because praying God's justice, that justice may just come to you, and if it does, it's not pretty. If God picks his justice over his grace, all of us are done. All of us. We are not better, we are forgiven. And we cannot forget that. So keep this in mind. I'm going to read this. It's a long section. It's almost the whole chapter. It's how hard Jesus goes. And this is the brick buster that none of us want to see. The brick buster that he's helping us make shots. That's the one we want. This brick buster, I pray that none of us face him. Let me read it to you. Starting in verse 13. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You won't go in yourselves, and you don't let others in either. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cross land and sea to make one convert, and then you turn that person and twice the child of hell you yourselves are. Blind guides, what sorrow awaits you. For you say that it means nothing to swear by God's temple, but it's binding to swear by the gold in the temple. Blind fools, which is more important, the gold or the temple that makes the gold sacred? And you say that to swear by the altar is not binding, but to swear by the gifts on the altar is binding. How blind! For which is more important, the gift on the altar or the altar that makes the gift sacred? When you swear by the altar, you are swearing by it and everything on it. And when you swear by the temple, you are swearing by it and by God who lives in it. And when you swear by heaven, you are swearing by the throne of God and by God who sits on the throne. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are careful to tithe even the tiniest income from your herb gardens, but you ignore the most important aspects of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. You should tithe, yes, but do not neglect the more important things. Blind guides, you strain water so you won't accidentally swallow a gnat, but you swallow a camel. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are so careful to clean the outside of the cup and the dish, but inside you are filthy, full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first wash the inside of the cup and the dish, and then the outside will become clean too. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, beautiful on the outside, but filled on the inside with dead people's bones and all sorts of impurity. Outwardly you look like righteous people, but inwardly your hearts are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. What sorrow awaits you, teachers of religious law, and you Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build tombs for the prophets your ancestors killed, and you decorate the monuments of the godly people your ancestors destroyed. Then you say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would never have joined them in killing the prophets. But in saying that, you testify against yourselves that you are indeed the descendants of those who murdered the prophets. Go ahead and finish what your ancestors started. Snakes, son of vipers, how you will escape the judgment of hell. Therefore I am sending you prophets and wise men, teachers of religious law. But you will kill some by crucifixion, you will flog others with whips in your synagogues, chasing them from city to city. As a result, you will be held responsible for the murder of all godly people of all time, from the murder of the righteous Abel to the murder of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you killed in the temple between the sanctuary and the altar. I tell you the truth, this judgment will fall on this very generation. Jesus goes in as the brick buster. Here's the thing sometimes we Christians fail to realize. Jesus knows every sin we've committed in our entire life. It may be hidden to other people, but it's not hidden to him. And when we pray for justice, he's saying, okay, let me bring out the list. And remember, this is public. The entire town is there. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are there. And he's like, I'm going to list every evil act you've committed publicly to all these people because you begged for justice. We have to pray for grace and for the love of God to come through. We cannot believe in our minds that we are better than anyone outside these doors. If you really even think for a second that you are better than the lost people out there, woe to you, Pharisee. Woe to you. None of us should feel above even washing the feet of the worst sinner out there. We should be going after them, not praying to God, please condemn them. Please bring your justice. Let's cut that out. We as the church, we've forgotten something so important. I've heard this a lot. People in the church are hypocrites. That's what they say, right? That's what people say out there. That's what that lady said to me. She's absolutely right. The problem is not that we're hypocrites. The problem is that we stopped acknowledging that we were hypocrites. We stopped saying, you're absolutely right. Let me point you to somebody who isn't. Let me point you to the perfect teacher. It's not me that you're worshiping, it's God. You're absolutely right, I am sinful. You're absolutely right, I have made mistakes. You're absolutely right, I am a hypocrite. Let me show you somebody who isn't. And we as the church, we've lost that message, and it's the whole reason we meet here. It's the whole reason any of us are in these seats. It's because God forgave us. Just because you start making threes, don't think that you're Michael Jordan. Go out and love people. You're not better, you're forgiven. Keep that in your mind, please. I want to read this last verse. He's not happy about having to be a brick buster. Something we all have to acknowledge. He doesn't enjoy it. This isn't a good time for him. He's not like, yeah, finally I get to just shove it in their face. No. He mourns. Check this out. This is the last verse of this chapter. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones God's messengers. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen protects her chicks beneath her wings, but you wouldn't let me. And now look, your house is abandoned and desolate. For I tell you this, you will never see me again until you say blessings on the one who comes in the name of the Lord. He doesn't enjoy being the brick buster. He doesn't enjoy being the guy who has to crush as the cornerstone. He weeps for the Pharisees. He weeps for the religious leaders. He weeps for Jerusalem. He weeps for those people. But he does what he was asked to do. Bring your justice. And he brought it. And he will bring it. We have to realize that we're under grace. That's what our hope is in. A couple take-homes, we'll get out of here. Are you willing to take the role of the humble servant on this team? Are you willing to be a humble servant? Are you a brick that needs to be busted, or are you a brick that needs to be crushed? When it comes to bricks, Jesus is our brick. He's the chief cornerstone. And throughout this series, we've talked about bricks being stuck in the mud, an obstacle to love. Don't be a brick. Be a living stone that is built into the foundation with Jesus as the cornerstone. Respond to Jesus. What does it mean to be on the brick busters team? Let me read this last verse, Joshua 24. So fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's time to make a choice. Do we want to be on this team? Are we willing to be humble servants? Are we willing to go out, put ourselves out there to reach the lost? That's the goal. Pray with me. Dear God, thank you for allowing us to gather together, Lord. God, you are perfect. Your teachings are perfect. Your commands are perfect. God, help us. Guide our hands. Help us become perfect as you are perfect. Help us burn sin out of our lives one at a time. God, until we are perfect with you. But don't let us ever get arrogant, God, because without you, we are just as lost. Without you, we are just as deserving of condemnation, God. Do not let us forget that. Let us always keep that in our mind, that you are necessary, you are perfect, you are the only reason that we can go out and love others, God. I pray all this in your name. Amen.